You know you're in trouble when the 7-foot-tall alien in full ceremonial armor points a clawed hand at you and announces, in front of 24 witnesses, that by the ancient laws of her people, you are now her personal mate. I should probably back up. 2 weeks earlier, I was just another washed-up logistics officer on a human freighter, the Antares Dawn. My job was dull but safe. Keep the manifests balanced, make sure crates got where they needed to, and avoid looking the captain in the eye when he inevitably asked for volunteer overtime. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near alien warrior queens, battlefield tribunals, or interspecies marriage law. But then we hit a patrol line belonging to the Crava Dominion. The Crava were one of those species humans had learned to treat very carefully. Towering, power-armored, and disturbingly elegant in their brutality, they ran their fleets like a mix between samurai clans and intergalactic tax collectors. You paid their tariffs, you lived. You didn't, you got inspected, which usually meant your ship came back missing cargo, crew, or both. Our captain, may his greed forever be remembered in the Bad Decision Hall of Fame, decided we could sneak through their border without paying the trade compliance contribution. His brilliant plan lasted until the first Crava dreadnought dropped out of warp 3 kilometers off our bow and told us to prepare for boarding. Fast forward to me, standing on their flagship's hangar deck, shoved forward as part of the representative delegation. Most of my shipmates were trembling, but I had long ago developed the survival reflex of cracking jokes whenever terrified. It had gotten me through firefights, awkward family reunions, and 2 failed marriages. Humor, I figured, would carry me through this too. That's when she appeared. Commander Zellara of the Dominion. She strode in like a thunderstorm wearing armor. Her plating shimmered with an oil-slick sheen, her helmet carried ceremonial horns, and her eyes, when the visor retracted, with a kind of piercing violet that made you suddenly very aware of every unpaid debt you'd ever had. The soldiers around her snapped to attention like gravity itself had just saluted. And she looked directly at me. Not at the captain. Not at our ship's negotiator. Me. You, she said, her voice carrying that resonant growl of someone who could casually crush skulls between thumb and forefinger. Step forward. I glanced behind me, hoping she meant someone else. Nope. Everyone else helpfully shuffled backward like I was radioactive. So I stepped forward, trying to look like a man who wasn't regretting every life choice that had led to this moment. You bear the mark, she said. The mark. I repeated, eloquently. She gestured at my collarbone, where my half-faded tattoo peeked out from my shirt. It was an Old Navy insignia, stylized wings wrapped around a star. To me, it was a bad decision from shore leave on Mars and a reminder never to get drunk near tattoo parlors. To her, apparently, it was something else entirely. The sigil of the first Skyborn, she declared. Her soldiers murmured. By law of conquest, any who bear that sign must be bound to a commander of the Dominion. It is written. My brain caught up about 3 seconds too late. Wait. Bound. You mean like... Yes, she said, with absolute seriousness. By law, you are my mate. Effective immediately. There was a pause. Somewhere in the hangar, one of the Crava soldiers coughed. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I laughed like a man who'd just heard the world's best setup for a joke and assumed the punchline was coming any second now. That's a good one. Mate. Huh. Sure, let's all have a laugh at the confused human's expense. Zellara didn't laugh. Instead, she turned, barked something guttural to her adjutant, and a massive slab of ceremonial stone was rolled onto the hangar deck by 2 drones. It was carved with alien script and looked like it weighed more than my ship. She pointed to a section of text and said, "Read." Of course, I couldn't. I could barely read Crava numbers, let alone ceremonial laws. So the adjutant helpfully translated. Article 12, subsection 3, those who carry the mark of the Skyborn must be joined to the commander who claims them. Refusal is dishonor punishable by ritual execution. The hangar went quiet. I stopped laughing. My mouth went dry. You're serious? Utterly. Zellara's eyes bored into me. You are mine now, human. And that's how I, Daniel Reyes, former supply officer and part-time cynic, ended up betrothed by interstellar law to an elite alien commander who looked like she could break me in half without spilling her drink. The first reaction from my crewmates? Relief. Because the moment Zellara made her declaration, she waved her hand and said, The rest of you are dismissed." Our captain practically tripped over himself, shoving everyone back toward the shuttle. Not a single one of them even glanced in my direction as I was left standing there, alone with my new mate. I shouted after them. "Seriously? Nobody's going to object? Protest? File a complaint with HR." The shuttle doors sealed with a hiss. "Traitors!" Zellara regarded me like one might a curious but fragile pet. "You appear unsettled." "Unsettled?" I squeaked. "Lady, you just declared me your mate in front of your entire army. I think unsettled is underselling it." She tilted her head. "Would you prefer the execution?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. "Point taken." "Very well," she said, turning on her heel. "You will adapt." And just like that, I was swept into her world. Life aboard the Dominion flagship was, let's say, an adjustment. The Crava ship was built on a scale that made human vessels look like toys. Hallways towered 3 stories tall. Doors were slabs of alloy that required servos just to open. The food dispensers delivered steaming plates of something between steak and lava rock, and the air was spiced with metallic tangs that made me constantly feel like I was chewing on pennies. Everywhere I went, I was stared at. Not with the vague curiosity humans gave aliens, but with barely concealed hostility. To the Crava, I was an intruder who had somehow shortcut my way into their most sacred bonds. One officer even hissed at me when I passed. Actual hiss. Like a cat. I was tempted to hiss back, but I wasn't ready to get gutted in a hallway duel. Zellara, meanwhile, carried on as though dragging a confused human into her command structure was the most natural thing in the galaxy. She introduced me to her senior officers with absolute authority. "This is Daniel Reyes," she said. "My chosen mate." "Hi," I said weakly. "Big fan of your armor." The officers bowed stiffly, though their eyes suggested they would gladly toss me out an airlock if she gave the order. Over the next few days, I pieced together why she'd done it. The Crava believed the mark of the Skyborn, my dumb tattoo, was sacred. Something about ancient alliances, lost warrior kin, and prophecies I only half understood. By claiming me as her mate, Zellara wasn't just binding me, she was making a political move. She gained prestige. She tied her command to some half-mythical heritage. And conveniently, she got to keep a living human in her retinue, which apparently boosted her unorthodox honor. Lucky me. Of course, none of this made my situation easier. I was constantly challenged, tested, and dragged into rituals I didn't understand. One morning, I woke up to find a ceremonial blade at my bedside and a note that read, "Prove your worth in the sparring ring by sunset." Another day, I was told to prepare the mating chamber. I panicked for an hour straight until I learned that mating chamber was just a bad translation for bonding quarters, basically her private lounge. Though, to be fair, the way she watched me while explaining it didn't help my nerves. What really threw me, though, was Zellara herself. I expected her to treat me like baggage, a trophy, maybe even a hostage. But instead, she seemed genuinely curious about me. She asked about human customs, about Earth, about why we drank something as pathetic as coffee when we could just chew adrenal bark. She listened, really listened, to my stories, even when they were dumb anecdotes about missing socks on laundry day. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, I caught her smiling. Which was terrifying, because a smiling Crava commander looked like a predator who'd just discovered dessert. The first real challenge came during a formal gathering in the Dominion War Council chamber. I was dragged along, dressed in an ill-fitting ceremonial robe, and made to stand beside Zellara's throne-like chair while generals debated strategy. Halfway through, one of the generals slammed his clawed hand on the table and shouted, "This is absurd! The commander has bound herself to a human. A soft, fragile, unblooded outsider. It is an insult to our traditions." The chamber erupted in growls and hisses of agreement. Zellara rose slowly, her armor catching the chamber lights. "Do you challenge my claim?" The general sneered. "I do." Then, to my horror, he pointed at me. "Let the human prove his worth, or release him, and spare us this disgrace." The room waited, hundreds of alien eyes drilling into me. Zellara's gaze was steady, unreadable. "And me?" I swallowed hard and realized, with absolute clarity, that my survival depended not on brute strength, but on something else entirely. Humor. Improvisation. Humanity. I forced a grin, stepped forward, and said the only thing I could think of. All right. Who wants to arm wrestle? The thing about volunteering yourself for an alien trial by strength contest is that eventually someone takes you up on it. Arm wrestling. General Vorth, the mountain-sized officer who had challenged Zelara's claim, tilted his head with open contempt. Do you mock our traditions, human? Mock? No, no, I said, forcing a grin that was 90% bluff and 10% existential panic. This is a time-honored Earth tradition. Tests of strength, endurance, and sheer stubbornness. 2 warriors, 1 table, no weapons. The Krava generals muttered to each other, intrigued despite themselves. Vorth sneered. Very well. If this is the way of your kind, then prove yourself. They cleared the center of the council chamber. A massive table was dragged into place. Zelara sat back down, her expression carved from stone, though I swore I saw the faintest glimmer of amusement flicker across her eyes. I rolled up my sleeve, sat down, and set my elbow on the table. My hand looked like a child's toy compared to Vortha's clawed gauntlet, which thudded down opposite mine. On my mark, Zelara said, her voice carrying the weight of command. Begin. The pressure hit instantly, like trying to stop an avalanche with one arm. My knuckles screamed, my elbow felt like it was grinding into dust, and Vorth was already smirking, certain he'd flatten me in seconds. That's when I remembered a little trick from my Navy days. The secret to arm wrestling isn't raw strength. It's leverage, angles, and, if you're desperate, distraction. You know, I said between grunts, for a fearsome warlord species, you've got surprisingly delicate manicures. Is that a new claw polish? Vortha's eyes flickered to his hand for just a second. I shifted my weight, twisted my wrist, and used the momentum to force his hand down another inch. Gasps rippled around the chamber. He growled, pushing back harder. My arm trembled like a collapsing bridge. I was seconds from defeat. So I did what any reasonable human would do. I headbutt the table. The sudden impact startled him just enough that his grip faltered. I poured every ounce of adrenaline, stubbornness, and blind panic into one last shove. Bam! His hand slammed into the table. The chamber went silent. I blinked, half dizzy from smacking my own forehead, and raised my free hand. Winner! Zelara rose, her voice ringing like thunder. The challenge is met. My mate stands. For a long, terrible moment, I thought the generals might revolt anyway. But Krava law was law, and none of them could deny what they'd just witnessed. Vorth snarled but backed down, and the council session resumed. Meanwhile, I nursed a throbbing arm and the beginnings of a spectacular forehead bruise. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because now I wasn't just the human mate. I was the human who embarrassed a general in public. Which meant every ambitious officer with something to prove suddenly had me in their sights. The next few weeks were a blur of bizarre tests. One officer challenged me to a duel with shock staves. I survived only because I convinced him humans fought best in teams, roped in a confused junior Krava cadet, and turned the duel into an impromptu doubles tennis match. We lost, but apparently my tactical innovation was worth respect. Another officer tried to poison me by swapping my meal with something called Ral venom broth. Luckily, Krava cuisine already tasted like chemical warfare, so I didn't notice until Zelara casually mentioned it over dessert. You have not collapsed, she observed. Should I have? I asked, mid-bite. It kills most within 30 heartbeats. I stared at the half-empty bowl in horror. And you didn't stop me? She shrugged. Survival is proof of strength. Perhaps your species is more resistant than expected. Or maybe the venom had just gotten lost trying to figure out whether to attack my cholesterol or my caffeine dependency. Either way, I lived. Amidst all this chaos, I started noticing patterns. The Krava were obsessed with ritual and law, but they weren't immune to loopholes. Every test had rigid rules, which meant I could exploit them in ways no Krava would dare. When challenged to a hunting contest, I built a pit trap and lured the beast in with a recording of myself singing off-key. When ordered to recite their battle oaths, I translated them into Shakespearean English and performed it with dramatic hand gestures. Half the audience was scandalized. The other half thought I was a prophet. Slowly, grudgingly, the crew began to tolerate me. Not like me, exactly. More like they didn't immediately fantasize about ejecting me into space whenever I walked into a room. Zellara remained complicated. She rarely explained herself, but she was always watching. Sometimes she corrected my posture during a ritual. Other times she quizzed me about human military tactics, history, or even music. One night, after another council session devolved into bickering, she summoned me to her quarters. "You confuse them," she said, pouring me a glass of something that looked like molten silver. "They do not know whether to despise you or follow you." "Story of my life," I muttered, then realized who I was talking to. Respectfully." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Respectfully," she echoed, tasting the word like it was foreign. We sat in silence for a while. I nursed the alien drink, which tasted like vodka mixed with lightning. Finally, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the start. "Why me?" Her gaze sharpened. "You carry the mark." "Yeah, but so what? It's just a tattoo. I got it because I lost a bet in the Navy. It doesn't mean anything." "To you," she said. "To us, it is legacy. A reminder of the Skyborn, who once fought alongside our ancestors. To claim you is to claim that heritage. And to bind you to me is to secure my command against rivals." There it was. Cold, political calculation. Yet her tone wasn't entirely cold. There was something else buried there. A flicker of curiosity. Maybe even respect. I sighed. "So I'm a walking political pawn." "Perhaps," she admitted. Then, more quietly, "But you are also unexpected." Before I could unpack that, she dismissed me with a wave of her hand. The real escalation came when we reached the front. The Dominion was at war, skirmishes with a rival species called the ZRYTH. Where the Crava were tall, armored, and ceremonial, the ZRYTH were spindly horrors with blade arms and hive tactics. Imagine mantises with a grudge and you've got the idea. Our fleet dropped out of warp near the contested system of Lawrence Reach. Immediately, alarms blared. ZRYTH ships swarmed like hornets, darting in coordinated waves. I'd seen combat before, but never on this scale. Hundreds of capital ships traded fire. Fighters screamed through the void. Energy beams lit up the darkness like gods dueling with flashlights. On the command deck, Zellara barked orders with lethal precision. Her officers obeyed instantly, but the tension was palpable. For the first time, I realized how fragile her position really was. If she faltered, if her claim to authority was questioned, the fleet could fracture. And me? I was the wild card nobody trusted. So naturally, that's when the sabotage happened. Halfway through the battle, alarms shrieked from engineering. Power conduits ruptured, shields flickered, and the flagship shuddered as ZRYTH beams tore into its hull. "Traitors!" one officer roared. Another snapped. It was the human. All eyes turned to me. Perfect. I threw up my hands. "Hey, don't look at me. I don't even know how to flush your toilets, let alone sabotage a warship." Zellara's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough. Reyes, come with me." She dragged me down to engineering herself, past crews scrambling to contain fires and reroute power. Sure enough, the conduits weren't just failing, they'd been deliberately rigged. Crava law demanded swift judgment. The officers wanted blood. My blood. Zellara, though, hesitated. For the first time, her certainty wavered. So I did the only thing I could. I volunteered. "Let me fix it," I said. The room went silent. "You," one officer spat. "You think you can repair Crava systems?" "No," I admitted. "But I know sabotage when I see it. And I know humans are great at improvising under fire. Unless you'd rather sit here debating while the ship blows up." That got their attention. Zellara studied me for a long, tense moment. Then she nodded. "Do it." And that's how I found myself crawling through alien maintenance shafts, armed with nothing but a multi-tool, a roll of duct tape I'd smuggled aboard, and the sheer determination not to die. The conduits were sparking, overloaded, minutes from cascading failure. Crava engineers stared as I bypassed circuits, cross-wired relays, and literally used chewing gum to insulate a live panel. "Are you mad?" one shouted. "Yes," I grunted, tightening a bolt with my bare hand. "But I'm also still alive. Big difference." With one final spark, the conduits stabilized. The lights flickered back to life, shields roared online, and the flagship surged back into the fight. The crew stared at me like I'd just wrestled a god and won. Zelara's expression was unreadable. But when the ship steadied and the battle swung back in our favor, she turned to her officers and declared, "The human stands." And for the first time, no one dared argue. Of course, victory in one battle didn't mean safety. If anything, it painted a bigger target on my back. Because now I wasn't just the human mate. I was the human who had saved the flagship. And some people hated me for that even more. The first attempt on my life happened 3 days after the Battle of Lawrence Reach. I was walking back to my quarters, or, as I privately called it, the unofficial cultural zoo exhibit, when a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. A Crava officer dropped in front of me, blade drawn, eyes burning with righteous fury. "For the honor of the Dominion," he hissed. Now, I'm not a trained duelist. My combat record mostly consisted of dodging bar fights and knowing when to duck. But survival has a funny way of sharpening instincts. I didn't try to fight him directly. I did the very human thing. I panicked creatively. He lunged. I grabbed the first thing within reach, a maintenance drone rolling past, and shoved it between us. His blade sparked off the drone's chassis, and in the confusion I kicked him where no alien warrior expects to be kicked during an honorable duel. He crumpled, gasping, while I scrambled to hit the emergency alarm. Security dragged him away minutes later, but not before he shouted, "You will doom her! You will doom us all!" The words echoed in my skull long after they hauled him out. Zelara didn't flinch when I told her. "They will not stop," she said simply, as though discussing the weather. "Your existence challenges the old ways. To them, you are a threat." "I'm not a threat," I protested. "I'm a guy who almost broke his neck tripping over a drone last week." Her gaze was steady. "You are human. That is enough." I didn't know whether to feel insulted or flattered. The days blurred into tension. Whispers followed me in the halls. My food was tested before meals. More than once, I woke to find guards posted outside my quarters, Zelara's orders, though she never admitted it outright. And through it all, the war escalated. The ZRYTH weren't just fighting, they were winning. Swarms of their ships harried Dominion supply lines, cut off colonies, and picked apart outlying fleets. Rumors spread of whole planets falling under their hive influence, their populations cocooned and converted into soldiers. The Dominion Council convened constantly, and I was dragged along whether I liked it or not. The generals debated endlessly, each proposing strategies more rigid than the last. Strike here. Fortify there. None of it worked. Finally, during one particularly heated session, I couldn't take it anymore. "You're fighting like they're you," I blurted out. Every eye turned on me. "You're trying to duel an anthill. You can't out-ritual a swarm. You've got to think differently." "Differently?" General Vorth sneered. "What does the soft human suggest?" "Throwing rocks." "Not rocks," I said. "Chaos." The room went silent. I leaned forward, pulse hammering. Humans are good at one thing: breaking patterns. We fight dirty. We improvise. You're treating this like a chess match, but the ZRYTH are playing checkers. Fast, messy, overwhelming. So stop trying to predict them. Start surprising them. For a long, terrifying moment, I thought they'd laugh me out of the chamber. Then Zelara's voice cut through the silence. "He is right." Her support didn't silence the council entirely, but it shifted the balance. Enough that some of the younger commanders began to listen. And just like that, I found myself co-opted as an unofficial tactical consultant. Which, translated from Crava legalese, meant if this works, we'll take credit. If it fails, we'll blame the human. Lucky me. The second assassination attempt was less subtle. We were in transit, fleet regrouping, when the ship's gravity suddenly failed. I floated midair, flailing, while bulkheads slammed shut around me. A decompression charge hissed as the airlock cycled open, ready to vent me into space. For one surreal second, I saw the stars. Beautiful. Cold. Final. Then a gauntlet hand seized my arm and yanked me back. Zellara. She slammed her fist into the emergency override, sealing the hatch. Her eyes blazed. Enough. Later, after the saboteur was dragged off screaming, she stayed in my quarters longer than usual. "You are targeted because of me," she said quietly. "Because of us," I corrected. Then, before I could stop myself, "Do you regret it? Declaring me your mate?" Her expression was unreadable. Regret is for the defeated. Not exactly the reassurance I wanted, but there was something in her tone, a flicker of vulnerability, that kept me from pushing further. The breaking point came at the Battle of Threxan Rift. The Rift wasn't just another contested system. It was the gateway to Dominion space, a natural choke point where fleets either held the line or watched the core worlds burn. The ZRYTH came in force. Thousands of ships. Their hive-mind coordination made them terrifying, each vessel moving like a piece of a living organism. The Dominion threw everything at them. Dreadnoughts, carriers, planetary defense platforms. And still, we were losing. On the flagship's command deck, chaos reigned. Officers shouted, data screens flared, and hull impacts rattled the deck beneath our feet. Shields at 30%. Starboard batteries offline. Enemy breaching squad inbound. I gripped the railing, heart hammering. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was survival. Zellara barked orders, calm and commanding even as the walls shook. But I saw the tension in her jaw, the doubt creeping into the crew. That's when the betrayal struck. General Vorth, ever the thorn in her side, suddenly drew his blade and declared, "The commander has doomed us with her human weakness. I claim the right of challenge, now." He lunged at Zellara. Reflex took over. I shoved myself between them, grabbing the nearest thing at hand, a discarded plasma torch. Sparks flew as his blade clashed against my makeshift weapon. My arms shook, sweat poured, and I knew I couldn't last. Zellara roared, driving him back with a strike that dented the deck. They clashed, steel on steel, while the crew froze in shock. This wasn't just a duel. It was a coup. Vorth snarled, spitting venom. "You disgrace our people with this human pet." Zellara's answer was a blade to his chest. He collapsed, gurgling, as silence fell over the command deck. She stood over him, breathing hard, then turned to the crew. "Does anyone else question my command?" No one did. But the damage was done. The ZRYTH pressed harder, sensing weakness. Their ships swarmed, overwhelming our defenses. The rift was collapsing. "We can't hold them," one officer whispered. And then, in that desperate moment, all eyes turned to me. The human. I don't know what possessed me, but I stepped forward. "Listen," I said, voice cracking but carrying. "The ZRYTH are expecting order. They're expecting discipline. They're not expecting us to fight like maniacs." Zellara's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Scatter the fleet," I said. "Break formation. Hit them from every angle. Ram their carriers if you have to. Make it messy. Make it human." The council would have laughed me out of the room. But here, now, with death clawing at the hull, they listened. Zellara raised her blade high. "You heard him. Scatter. Strike. Make them bleed." The fleet broke. Crava dreadnoughts peeled off in unpredictable arcs. Fighters weaved erratically, abandoning rigid formations. Frigates darted like gnats, harrying ZRYTH supply ships. It was chaos. It was madness. And it worked. The ZRYTH swarm faltered, their hive mind struggling to adapt to unpredictable, irrational tactics. Carriers burned. Drones spiraled out of control. The rift became a graveyard of shattered ships. On the flagship, alarms still screamed, fires still raged, but the tide was turning. Zellara stood beside me, armor scorched, blade dripping. She didn't speak, but her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew we were no longer commander and pawn. We were partners. The final push nearly killed us. A ZRYTH boarding party breached the flagship, slicing through bulkheads like paper. Dozens of them poured onto the command deck, shrieking in unison. Zellara met them head-on, a whirlwind of steel and fury. I grabbed a fallen rifle and did my best impression of a soldier, firing wildly, ducking behind consoles, and generally trying not to die. At one point, a ZRYTH warrior loomed over me, blade raised. Instinct took over. I jammed the rifle barrel up under its jaw and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke my shoulder, but the alien went down in a spray of ichor. When the last ZRYH fell, the deck was littered with corpses, smoke, and sparks. I collapsed against the railing, chest heaving. Zellara, bloodied but unbowed, planted her blade in the deck and raised her head. "Victory," she declared. The crew roared. Against all odds, we had held the rift. Later, after the fires were out and the dead honored, I found myself alone with her in the quiet aftermath. "You saved us," I said softly. She shook her head. "We saved each other." There was a pause. A rare, fragile silence between us. Then she leaned closer, her voice low. "Perhaps the law bound us. But it is battle that forged us." And for the first time, I wasn't sure whether she meant commander and mate, or something more. The rift held. Against every prediction, against every doctrine, against every oddsmaker across the Dominion, we survived. But survival is never clean. The fleet limped away from Threxan Rift, battered and bloodied. Half our ships were wreckage drifting in silence. The survivors bore scars, some so deep they'd never be repaired. I'd never forget the sight of entire dreadnoughts, proud flagships of the Dominion, broken open like tin cans. In human wars, victory had always carried a price. The Crava were no different. They mourned, though not like we did. Their mourning was ritualized, chants echoing through the hangar decks, armor scarred black to honor the dead, blades planted upright where bodies once stood. I joined them, awkward at first, then more certain as the rhythm of their voices carried me along. My voice was thin compared to theirs, but it was there, human among giants, part of something greater. And when the chants ended, eyes turned to me again. Not with hostility, not with disdain, but with a strange, heavy expectation. The human had survived. The human had fought. The human had led. The war wasn't over. The ZRYTH had been bloodied, not destroyed. Their high fleets would regroup, adapt, and strike again. The rift was safe, but barely. The Dominion Council convened one last time aboard the flagship. I was dragged in, of course, though this time I walked under my own power. The generals debated furiously, voices rising like storms. Strike back. Fortify. Sue for temporary ceasefire. Finally, Zellara stood, and the room fell silent. "The human speaks," she said. And suddenly, I was the one on trial again. I looked around the chamber at dozens of eyes, all expecting something profound, something that would chart the course of the war. My stomach churned. My hands itched for a coffee cup that wasn't there. So I did the most human thing possible. I told the truth. "I don't have all the answers," I said. "I'm not a strategist, not a warrior like you. I'm a guy who got dragged into this because of a tattoo I don't even remember getting. But I know this, you can't fight the ZRYTH by pretending they're you. You have to fight like yourselves, and like us. Together. Mix tradition with chaos. Order with improvisation. Ritual with surprise." I took a breath. The room was silent. "They expect you to be predictable," I finished. "So don't be." For a long moment, nothing. Then one by one, the generals nodded. Not all, but enough. The decision was made. The Dominion would adapt. They would break their own rigid traditions, just enough, and fight with a little chaos. A little humanity. That should have been the end of my part in things. But nothing with the Crava was ever simple. Because after the council dismissed, Zellara didn't let me leave. She kept me in the chamber, alone with her. Her armor was scarred, her blade still carried ZRYH ichor, and yet she stood tall, unbroken, untouchable. And then, to my absolute shock, she removed her helmet. It clattered to the floor, and for the first time I saw her without it. No ceremonial horns, no filtered visor, no barrier. Just Zellara, violet eyes sharp and unreadable, scars tracing her cheek like lightning frozen in flesh. "You have changed them," she said. "I didn't change anyone," I muttered. "I just annoyed them into listening." Her lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. "Annoyance as weapon. Perhaps this is your true strength." "Better than arm-wrestling generals," I said. The smile deepened, though her eyes softened in a way that made me suddenly very aware of the silence between us. "You were bound to me by law," she said quietly. "But law is not enough. Bond is tested in fire. You stood. You fought. You endured. And you did not break." Her gaze held mine, steady and fierce. "You are no longer simply mate by law. You are mate by choice." My throat went dry. My brain screamed for a joke, an escape hatch, something. Instead, I just croaked out, "Does that mean I get better quarters?" Her laugh was low, dangerous, but real. Life aboard the flagship shifted after that. I wasn't a novelty anymore. I wasn't the human pawn or the political liability. I was Daniel Reyes, the mate who saved the rift, a phrase that made me cringe every time I overheard it in the halls. The officers treated me differently. Not friendly, exactly. Crava weren't built for friendly, but with a kind of grudging respect. When I entered a room, they no longer hissed. They saluted. Even the cadets started imitating me. I once caught two of them trying to arm wrestle with the exact same table head, but trick-eyed pulled on General Vorth. I wasn't sure whether to feel proud or guilty. Zellara, meanwhile, carried on as she always had, commanding, unyielding, terrifying in her competence. But there was a new undercurrent between us. Shared glances during council sessions. Quiet conversations in her quarters late at night. A bond forged in battle, wrapped in steel and law, but warmed by something neither of us could quite name. The third assassination attempt never came. Maybe it was because by then, nobody dared. Or maybe it was because the idea of targeting me wasn't just dishonorable anymore, it was unthinkable. I had survived poison, blades, and politics. I had earned my place, not by strength of arm, but by sheer, stubborn humanity. The Crava respected that. Reluctantly. And me. I learned something too. Humans weren't the strongest, or the fastest, or the most disciplined species in the galaxy. But we were stubborn, adaptable, unpredictable. And sometimes that was enough. The war raged on, but the rift became a rallying point. The Dominion fleets fought differently now, mixing their rigid formations with chaos maneuvers inspired by human unpredictability. They still lost ships, still bled, but they survived. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I found myself standing taller. Not because I'd become some great warrior. I was still just Daniel Reyes, ex-logistics officer with a bad tattoo and worse luck. But because I realized survival itself was victory. Every laugh, every joke, every improvisation, it was resistance. Humanity distilled. And the Crava, for all their strength, had learned from it. The final scene came months later. We stood on the observation deck of the flagship, staring out at the rift. The wreckage of battle still glittered across the stars, but so did the Dominion fleet, scarred yet unbroken. Zellara stood beside me, silent. I cleared my throat. "So, does this make me an honorary Crava now? Do I get a horned helmet? A blade? Maybe my own scary title?" She turned her head slowly, giving me the kind of look that could melt steel. "You wish for a title?" "Yeah," I said, grinning. "Something fearsome. Something to strike terror into our enemies." She considered. Then, with absolute seriousness, she said, "Reyes the Irritating." I stared. "You're kidding." Her lips curved in that rare, dangerous smile. "It is fitting. Irritation is your greatest weapon." I groaned. "I survive a galactic war, save your fleet, and I get called irritating?" "Really?" Her hand, clawed, armored, and yet strangely gentle, rested briefly on my shoulder. "Really?" And for once, I didn't argue. Because maybe irritation, stubbornness, and a very bad tattoo really were humanity's gifts to the stars. Epilogue. If you'd told me months ago that I'd end up as the legally bound mate of an elite alien commander, fighting in a galactic war, I'd have laughed until I choked. But here I was. Alive. Scarred. Changed. Zellara called me mate by choice now, not by law. The crew saluted when I passed. And somewhere deep down, I'd stopped feeling like an outsider. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was part of the fight. Part of something bigger. And in the cold, endless void of the galaxy, that was enough. Well, that, and the fact that no one had tried to poison my dinner in 3 weeks. I was calling that a win.